Hello, friends. It's that time again. It's the Gold and Steel podcast where we talk everything Vegas Golden Knights. And boy, do we have a lot to talk about. I'm JP. As usual, I'm here with my good buddy, my partner in crime, Ian. And we're going to do a quick wrap up of the Western Conference Final, which, unless you've been living under a rock, you know Vegas advanced. And it's now going to the Stanley Cup Final, which we will preview. Ian, they did it, man. I wasn't sure there for a second, but what do you think, man? It turned out pretty well, right?
It did. And hello, everybody. Again, this feels like a couple of episodes ago. I'm not traveling this time. So I'm not in the car. I'm not in my normal location, so hence the lack of video. But I was quite quiet on Twitter the last couple of days when it was getting ready for Game 6. I could tell the kind of Twitterverse, or the Vegas Twitterverse, was getting more and more agitated, and I can totally understand why, by the way. But they did it, man, and they did it. Like, if you're going to win Game 6, you win with a shutout, and you absolutely destroy your opponent. You know, I was not sat there in the third period thinking, "Wow, this could go either way." So it was quite relaxing in the end. But it wasn't a white knuckle ride right to the end. But let's just do a quick recap of how the series went, because it definitely had no shortage of drama, right? Games, if I'm not mistaken, games 1 and 2 both went to overtime, and Vegas won both of those. So those were close games, right? Those were games that in OT. Oftentimes an OT game can go either way for sure. Game 3, Vegas dominated, right? That was a 4-0 victory, as I recall. And then Dallas comes storming back and wins Game 4 and Game 5, to the point that everybody thinks Dallas may actually pull off coming back from 3-0, which has only happened 4 times in the history of the modern NHL, or the history of the NHL period, I think. People were really believing there for a second, but it's fascinating. If you don't know about this, I'm sure most of the people who listen to this podcast do, but I think it's fascinating that in Game 3, Jamie Benn gets that horrendous 5-minute major and game misconduct for the cross-check on Stone's face. He gets suspended for 2 games, and Dallas only won the games where Ben was out of the lineup. So when Jamie Benn was in the lineup, they lost all 4 games that he was in for. So crazy. I don't know. What do you think, Ian? I mean, for me, I kind of feel like, and we talked about this a little bit, I feel like Dallas was almost strangely inspired in some way by losing their captain, and they kind of dug deep, maybe to try to keep the series alive until he came back. But I feel like they really were kind of spent. I feel like those 2 emotional games, I feel like there just wasn't any gas left in the tank by Game 6. That's kind of what I saw. But what's your take on that? This was a weird series, right? Really up and down. It is weird. But we predicted 6 or 7 games. So yeah, and I think if it had been 6 games and there hadn't been the 3-0 start, then there wouldn't have been the panic that we saw going into Game 6 from the Vegas fan base. You're right, though, and that's where, for me, you can kind of look at the series as they won it in 6. But if you break down the games like you did a minute ago, Games 1 and 2 could have gone either way. Really could have gone either way. Game 4 could have gone either way. If Vegas could well have closed it out in 4, they didn't. But they could have done. It wasn't a whitewash by any stretch of the imagination. Game 5 was probably the banana skin for Vegas, and that was the one where then you and you rightly said, JP, people started giving that commentary around, well, maybe Dallas are going to come back. But I just think it was a bridge too far. There's a reason why only 4 teams in 100 years have managed to come back from 3-0, and that's because it's ridiculously difficult. And there's always a reason why you're 3 down in the first place. And I think Dallas will look back on that series, and it'll be what could have been, because I don't think there was a massive gulf in quality between the 2 teams. I don't think that that Vegas were streets better than Dallas. They obviously won the series, which was job done. And in Game 6, they looked a lot better. But you hit the nail on the head in terms of, I think that was more, second the game got away from Dallas, heads drop. Because everybody knows in the stadium, they know, in
the locker room, everybody knows their season is done. And that must be so deflating. It's just, yeah. So if they'd have won game 6, I think game 7 could have been really, really, really tight. And I'm glad that they didn't. But it was, it was close. It was close, and it was a great series.
There was definitely that feeling in game 6 of they have to close it out tonight. It felt that way to me. They have to close it out in game 6, because if they let this go to 7, kind of like you said before, I think you said this on the last episode, Ian, if you're stupid enough to let it get to game 7, anything can happen. And you could argue that, okay, both teams have pressure, but if Vegas lets it get to game 7, there's more pressure on them of having to forevermore wear the moniker of the team that let Dallas come back from 3-0. I was dreading that as a fan. I remember thinking that, like, oh, please don't, I'll survive the loss if they get eliminated, but it's the moniker of being knocked out after going up 3-0. That's just not a badge any team wants to wear. But speaking of game 6, a lot of people in the Vegas camp and Vegas fans and people in this part of the country are saying that it was a perfect hockey game. Like, it was one of the best games Vegas has ever played. It's certainly the best playoff game I've ever seen them play. I've seen them play some regular season games that were pretty amazing, but this was you could almost say that it was the perfect hockey game. I mean, they were absolutely dominant from start to finish, smothered Dallas. I mean, Dallas had nothing going at all in that game, and it was right from the puck drop, and the game was over in the first period. They were up 3-0 at the end of the first. So it was a clinic, and like you said, great timing. That's a great way to close out the series, before you head into the final. Although, do we carry momentum from series to series? I'm not so sure about that. Like, the matchups change, the opponent changes, but the team has got to be feeling good with a performance like that. And I guess the big question is, and you brought this up, and we'll cover this a little more when we get to our Stanley Cup Final preview here in a few minutes, but the main thing is it's this rest situation, right? And clearly the Panthers are going to be very well rested. Will it come back to haunt Vegas that they had to play a harder series? They could have closed it out in 4, right? It could have been sweep. And instead they had to play 6 games. So do you think that's something that, that could come back to haunt them? I mean, they're still going to get quite a bit of time off here. I think they will have had 5 or 6 days off by game 1 of the Stanley Cup Final. It's also hard to say where their health is. I know nobody's missing time. Nobody's missing games right now. But, by this point in the playoffs, a lot of guys are playing hurt, right? We just don't know it. So, but what do you think? I mean, could they pay a price for that? Or do you think that's a kind of a non-issue?
No, it's probably 2 schools of thought. So I do think it would be nice to have the break, and Florida are probably benefiting health-wise from the break. But I guess the counter to that argument would be that they're also going to have lost that momentum that you mentioned earlier, because it's so long that Florida has absolutely destroyed Carolina, as we were saying before we click record. There was swept them, done in 4, and they've had a lot of time to plan. So that might be a benefit, but they've also had a lot of time to kind of lose game sharpness, and we see that in all sports. So will it really affect them? Probably not. I mean, I think this is one of those talking points where it's very easy to make this sound like it's going to be a really pivotal swing in the series. It probably won't be. I think both teams have played a lot of games. I mean, they play 82 games in a regular season, so these guys are already knackered before they go into the playoffs. They've both pretty much played the same number of games. I don't know exactly how many games Florida have played, but I know that they didn't sweep every series, and they had a really hard series in the first round. And obviously, then it was the infamous Leafs series, with those memes of the fans chanting "We want Florida" are still ringing around the internet. But so I think it's probably a nil point. I think for every plus, there's a minus on the other side. I do think the momentum will carry into game 1. Would it last past game one? Well, it depends how game one goes, because it is a different opponent. They've got different strengths, as we're going to talk about in a bit. Dallas are not Florida. Florida are not Dallas. They're two very different hockey teams. And likewise for us, Vegas are not Carolina. So we've got different strengths and weaknesses that the Carolina didn't bring to the series that Florida just had. And arguably, this is always the thing when you get East versus West now. You start to see the difference in terms of the physical makeup of the teams. And the West has always been seen as this kind of big, strong, heavy conference, whereas the East has always been seen as more skilled. So you do get that kind of mixed match. And this is a team that Vegas haven't really seen in the regular season like they do their divisional rivals. So it's going to be interesting. I don't think that the break makes that much difference, mate. It would do if it was earlier in the playoffs, because you don't get the gap like we get now. But because they get down and let's be honest, they tie everything up so that game 4, 5, and 6, 5, 6, and 7 are all at good times for TV. So there's a nice break, and I think that's going to benefit both.
Yeah, for sure. I was just doing the math in my head. So
dangerous.
Actually, but before we, because we're starting to ooze into Stanley Cup preview here, I want to cover one more point on the conference final, and then that will be a good transition into the Stanley Cup final. So we'll put a pin in that. I'm going to come back to it. But Adin Hill, man, I mean, look,
wow.
We were just talking about this. Adin Hill has a higher save percentage than Bobrovsky does right now. Bobrovsky's been an absolute brick wall. Now, you could say some of that. You could say some of that is Vegas's defensive system, but talk to me about Adin Hill. I mean, this is.
This is a guy who, when he joined Vegas, I mean, you both said it. He was brought in to be a backup, arguably initially a backup to a backup, because they weren't sure what was going to happen with Lerner, and we'll park that until the off season because there's a load of stuff we could talk about there, which we're not going to. But this is a guy who has never really been given a shot. He's never really had the chance to kind of show what he can do on the big stage. When he was at Arizona, there was a lot of talk about Adin Hill being this kind of upcoming prospect and has the ability to be a starter, but it never really happened. Now he's had his chance. He's grabbed it with both hands. I mean, let's just quickly go through the 6 games against the Dallas Series. Right, and his save percentage overall, as you rightly said, is .937. And Bobrovsky's is .935. They're both awesome, by the way. But that .937, that is Marc-Andre Fleury at his prime style playoffs. Like, that is the sort of thing that only the elite goalies do, right, to be this consistent. So defense, I think, definitely helps, but he's saving shots. So he had 23 saves in Game 6. We talked about Game 6. It was a bit of a rout. Game 5, okay, that was not great. 30 saves out of 34, 882 save percentage. Game 4, 929 save percentage, 39 saves, 42 shots. Game 3, shutout, 34 saves. Game 2, it was 28 shots, 26 saves, again, 929. And then the first game, 33 saves of 36 shots, 917. So all in all, that is pretty impressive in terms of save percentage. And I think, he's faced a lot of adversity as well in terms of he got thrown in. It wasn't that Brossoit was doing poorly and he was brought in and it was like a case of, well, can he save our season? Brossoit was playing well and he went down injured. But I think Hill's done 2 things. One, he has 100% been one of the reasons why Vegas is not only in the Stanley Cup Final, but why they could win it. And we'll keep a pin in that. But the other thing is he's made the Vegas offseason really tough, because where you would have thought Logan Thompson is the guaranteed starter next year, I'm not. And I know some Vegas fans Logan Thompson's their boy, but I'm not being funny. But if Adin Hill isn't the starter of Vegas, I would expect him to be the starter somewhere else, because he's proven he can do it.
Yeah, and it would have to be Logan Thompson would have to fight his way back in. Like it's definitely not his net by. For a while there, it was kind of his net by default, and it's not that way anymore. Especially if Vegas goes on to win the cup and Hill's the guy, right? It's unlucky for Thompson, but Hill will be the man going forward until proven otherwise, like you said, or unless it's for someone else. But I would. I think I'm almost positive they would try to lock him down, keep him on the team. And like I said, we'll save it for the off season, as far as Leonard goes. But I've said this many times before. I never expect to see Leonard in a Vegas Golden Knights jersey again. So and we can dive into that more. And if he ever even plays hockey again, it won't be for the Knights. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But I mean, what an amazing story. And we saw flashes of this from Adin Hill, like I said, in the middle of the regular season, but he got injured. He was starting to play some amazing hockey and had a couple of incredible performances and then got hurt. And it wasn't even clear. He didn't leave a game injured either. It was the New Jersey game, which was outstanding. One of the best performances of the year. He didn't leave that game hurt. He finished the game, and then all of a sudden, I think it was the next day or 2 days later, he's out hurt. So might have been the kind of thing where he was good enough to finish, and then after the game, he's like, oh wow, I'm how that goes.
But this is a different set of pressure, isn't it? I mean, I think that's what's been most impressive for me. Not just that he's got a great save percentage and he's winning games. It's that he's doing this in really, really high pressure scenarios, and he showed once or twice now in this playoffs that he can have a bad game and then bounce back. Because his first game in net after he took the start from Brossoit, when Brossoit went down in the Edmonton series, it wasn't easy, and it wasn't a great game, and Vegas lost it from memory, it wasn't. There was then question marks over whether he could actually do this, and I think me and you both said at the time that this is his first ever playoff game. We've got to give the guy a chance. And he then the next game he was fantastic, and he showed that he can take some punches and get back up, and that's what you need from a goalie, and that's what Bobrovsky's also showed. I think this is going to be, without getting too into the preview, but this is by far Adin Hill's performances are the reason why Vegas, or one of the main reasons why Vegas are in the Stanley Cup Final. He has been absolutely outstanding, and hats off to him.
Yeah. He's made some absolutely outstanding saves. Several times, watching the game where I've said, "Wow, how did that not go in?" Right? When you see a save like that, when you're waiting for the ref to point, and for the goal horn to go off or whatever, and you're thinking that's in for sure. That's in, and somehow it's not, and somehow it's in Adin Hill's glove. He's coming up with, like you said, he's making the saves that he should make, and he's making quite a few that he shouldn't.
Correct.
It's been quite a ride. Now, one other point before we move on to our Stanley Cup preview that probably isn't getting talked about a whole lot, but it makes a lot of sense to me. I heard Gary Lawless on a podcast today, and Gary Lawless, for those of you who don't know, is one of the reporters that works for the team, and he does radio color commentary, and anyway, big part of the Golden Knights organization. He was a guest on a podcast today, and he mentioned how important Jonathan Quick's presence has been for Adin Hill's performance, and that makes a lot of sense to me, because if you think about it, Jonathan Quick, total veteran, he's been here before, been there, done that. Won 2 Stanley Cups, I think, right? He's been down that road. And according to Lawless, Jonathan Quick's attitude is not, well, I'm waiting for this guy to fail so that I can get in there. His attitude has been very much like, hey, we're all part of this team. And he's coaching Hill, and he's helping Hill with pointers, and he's, keeping Hill focused and calm. And so I think, it's one of those things where picking Jonathan Quick up, we'll see how things go. He may never see any game time during the playoffs, but that still may have been a really wise move for a lot of other reasons, for those intangibles that you don't necessarily see on the ice. It makes perfect sense to me. It's got to be really calming to have him sitting there on the bench, right? A guy who's been there, done that, grizzled veteran, right? This guy knows what's up when it comes to deep playoff runs. So I thought that was a really interesting point. And, fingers crossed, knock on wood, we may still see Quick in there. Hopefully they ride Adin Hill, to the end. But if Quick never sees any game time during this playoffs, he will have still played a huge role in how
I
this,
agree.
this.
And I think he's playing that kind of mentor role, isn't he? You know, people, it happens in work as well. You get that kind of coach versus mentor style of management. And I think with Adin Hill and Jonathan Quick, and you're right, Quick did win two Stanley Cups, 2012 and 2014. But he's playing that role of the mentor. You know, he's playing that role of managing Adin Hill through this, you know, as being that voice. And I think and we've seen other goalie tandems do that. And that's where the more experienced head, like you said, it's not a battle for the first, because, you know, Quick didn't want to get traded in the first place, and then obviously he's not going to be that fussed whether he starts or not. I'm sure he'll want to, but it's fine. I think, but Adin Hill, I mean, just to finish on him, and I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. We've got a Stanley Cup final to win first, but you know, there's part of me that hears the word MVP when I think of Adin Hill. Obviously, Quick won the Conn Smythe in 2012, so he wouldn't be the first goalie to win the MVP. But I think Adin Hill has been that good, and I'm sure that there's, you know, we could argue until the cows come home about the different Vegas players and what they've brought to it. You know, Marcia Show, Eichel, others, but it's just, yeah, he's been an absolute rock. So it's fantastic.
Yeah. It's been an absolute blast to watch, and hopefully it continues. So let's get into this Stanley Cup Final, man. This is this is Vegas's second appearance in the Stanley Cup Final in 6 years, and they are a very different Vegas Golden Knights team than the team that went to the final in year one. And I just was doing the math earlier when you were talking in terms of between the two teams. So Florida has played 16 games, because there were 7 games in the first round, 5 games in the second round, and 4 games in the so 16 games, and then 4 rounds in the conference final, and then Vegas has played 1 more game. Vegas has played 17. They went 5 games, 6 games, and 6 games.
6 and 6, yeah.
And Vegas has 1 more loss than Florida, so pretty close actually in terms of how many games each team has played. But this feels different to me than year one. Year one was that Cinderella story. It was that tenacious, scrappy team that nobody expected anything out of. In some ways, the roles are flipped a little bit this time around. Now, Florida is not quite the same as the first year Vegas Golden Knights, but it's almost like the roles are flipped a little bit. Florida is that tenacious, forechecking team, tremendous work ethic. You know, Vegas is that sort of complete roster. They're a complete roster and totally poised to win a cup. And the interesting thing about playoff runs is, you know, you always think how it's going to go. You always think you know how it's going to go. And it's going well until it's not, right? And I remember in year one, it was like, oh, Vegas is going to go all the way. They're going to win the cup. And they beat Winnipeg in 5 games in the conference final. And so you're thinking, oh, they're going to be great. Had a loosey-goosey game 1 against the Caps, and that was it. They ran into a wall, and they could never overcome it again. So that's the crazy thing. We can predict all day what we think is going to happen in this final, but it could happen to either team, right? Like, you're doing well until you're not, until you hit a wall, or, you know, who knows what goes on. But talk to me a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about Florida, because wow, have they been impressive, right? They have been a truly impressive story. Now, we forget that they won the President's Trophy last year, right? So we're not dealing with a crappy core, but their regular season was a little bit disappointing, right? And they barely squeezed into the playoffs. But boy, did they heat up at the right time. And you knock Boston out. I mean,
it's going to make
no wonder these guys believe they can beat anybody, right? They beat Boston. They probably think, you know, they may think they've got this in the bag already. So, but talk to me a little bit about Florida. Well, like, what do we got to watch out for against these guys?
You're right. I mean, look, they're a great team. They've retained most of their core. That was the President's Trophy win. Obviously, they had the massive trade in the offseason, which was where they brought into Chuck, the Calgary and Florida trade, the one that Huberdeau into Chuck and all that mess that happened with it, which obviously looks like it's benefited Florida far more than Calgary. But, you know, that's it didn't always look like that for the regular season. So this is a team that's got some really, really big strengths, but they didn't have a good regular season. They only just got into the playoffs. I'm pretty certain, and feel free to correct us below on the comments on either Twitter or YouTube. But if I'm mistaken here, but I'm pretty certain that it was the last game of the season that they actually clinched. I don't think that, and if they didn't, it was the game before that. They didn't clinch like a lot of the other teams that were in the wild card spots, especially in the West, where they clinched with days to go. It was literally them or Pittsburgh, I think, or them and maybe one of the other teams, and it was right down to the wire whether they were going to get in or not. And ultimately, at that point, everybody was saying this is a really disappointing season. And there's been other things. There was the Spencer Knight issue, which plagued them at the beginning of the season. Obviously, he's not there at the moment. He's off getting help. And that obviously knocked the team back. They changed new coach, obviously, Paul Maurice coming in, and we'll talk about him in a bit. So there's a change of style. And we've seen that in Vegas in terms of sometimes that clicks, sometimes it doesn't. It takes a bit of time to click. But Jesus Christ, since they made the playoffs, they've been absolute beasts. Like you said, you had like the David and Goliath, which was Boston versus Florida, and they beat them. And I think ever since then, they've looked and felt unstoppable. And when they tore Carolina apart, I think that was, people are now standing up and saying these guys could do this. And I don't think this is an easy game. But like you rightly said, everything's going great until it's not. Can they handle it? If Vegas win the first two games, can they pick themselves back up again like they did against Boston? Obviously, they weren't 3-0 down. I think it was 3-1 when they turned it around. I think they'd won one game in between. But they had to fight back to win that series. But since then, it's been a pretty much a rolling forward. So I think, this is a good hockey team. A very different opponent to what we used to, and one that we can't. Vegas can't sleep on these guys. But you're right in terms of Vegas. It is different to year one. They're not the underdog now. If anything, Florida are. But it's I'm really excited for it. I kind of hope it goes to 7 because I love like the game 7, everything on the line. And Vegas fans are going to be like, only if we win it. But it's it's going to be a hell of a series.
It's got to be so painful to get to a game 7 and not make it, right? To get that close. Or what we haven't seen in the Stanley Cup Final in a long time is like game 7 OT, right? Like that, that's the kind of thing that could put you in an early grave and especially if you get that close and don't make it. So, I'm not sure my cardiovascular system could handle it, but hey, it could very well go that way, right? I mean, this is not going to be an easy series for either team, but this is the best shot that Vegas has, legitimate shot Vegas has at the Cup. Year one was that was a Cinderella story, and everybody was excited and like these guys might be able to do it, but in reality, they probably were never going to beat the Capitals. Like the Capitals were just a considerably better team, and Vegas was super banged up by the final. Even though most of the team was playing after the fact, they were beyond banged up. Like they were so injured, totally ran out of gas. But Vegas this year, they still have a lot of gas left in the tank. I'm not seeing a team now. Given we know that there's going to be injuries that guys are playing through that we don't know about, but the other difference is in year one there were players that missed considerable amounts of time during the playoffs, like guys that were out injured.
Yep.
And so far, Brossoit is the only guy that we know who's missed time for injury, or at least. It's quite possible, right? A couple of the guys that sit in the press box who have kind of come into the lineup and out, Bluger, Amadio, those guys, maybe those guys are nursing something, right? And then that's why they benched them or something. But by and large, it seems like the team is still intact.
Yep.
And still pretty peppy. I don't think Stone's at 100%. I think it's pretty obvious that he hasn't been the entire playoffs. But we're not surprised by that, right? He doesn't need to be. Yeah. It's what he brings in spirit and his hockey IQ, even when he's not at 100%, right?
Yeah, it's what he brings, as the captain. Is what it's. He lifts the team. He's the emotion that runs through that squad, and that's what he brings. And he could bring that even if he was 50%, and he's certainly healthy enough to play. I mean, you can tell that Dallas knew how big an impact that Stone makes, because everybody was trying, and we saw it with Edmonds as well. Everybody's trying to take him out. Everybody's trying to get him, being harsh, but it's true. They're trying to injure him because they want him to be out because they know he's such a big thing for Vegas.
Right.
And I think, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, man, but for me, I think there's three big things that this series is going to be about. And we can talk about strengths and stuff in a minute, but the three battles for me that I think are going to decide the Stanley Cup Final, this is the hot take, right, is the goalie battle is one. Who's going to come out on top? Bobrovsky versus Hill. Both been fantastic to now. Who's going to win that? It's going to be pivotal. Then you've got the X factor, as I've wrote down here, which is who of the elite stars, and both teams have them, whether it's Eichel, Tkachuk, whoever, who's going to stand up and be counted there? Because there's a couple of names on both team sheets that need to play. Obviously, Tkachuk's got 21 points. He is, let's think, either the second or third highest point scorer in the playoffs, and obviously he's played less games. So he obviously is on fire, but Vegas have been scoring points as well, albeit it's more distributed across the team. And then the last one is around the coaches. You've got two very different styles, and I don't think for a minute that Game 6 wasn't that kind of change in Vegas's attitude wasn't driven by Cassidy. I don't think for one moment Cassidy took them back in the locker room after Game 5 and said, "Don't worry about it, guys. On to the next one." I think he probably gave them an absolute rollicking, and then they kick up the arse that they needed, and then they came out in Game 6 and got it done. Paul Maurice is a very similar style of coach from that mentality, but they play very different styles of hockey, and you're going to see that kind of mix matching styles when the two teams face off in 48 hours. So. That's the three big battles for me. Whoever wins those three, the two of those three, I think goes on to win it.
Yeah. I anticipate a really exciting series, and you've got all the characters too, right? There's like these larger than life characters on both of these teams, like Tkachuk, and this guy, his personality during this playoff run, right? Like his leadership, and he's scoring all these game winners. And I don't know if you've seen the way he sort of skates off the ice. Like when he scores a game winner, he doesn't want to stand out there and celebrate. He's just like, "Come on," and he skates off the ice immediately. Have you seen that? A couple of game winners. Yeah, it's really unusual, right? So there's all this personality coming from that guy, and then you got guys like Radko Gudas, right? Who just like monster. He's like something out of a comic book, right? And you look at this guy now with his playoff beard, right? He looks like it looks like Zeus or something. Like his beard is sticking, it's like sticking out a foot from his face. Like there's like the series is ripe for all kinds of drama and storylines, which is part of what makes playoff hockey so much fun. And I think the three battles that you mentioned I think you're spot on there. In the West, we obviously don't know Florida quite as well. We don't watch them as often. I remember they looked amazing last year. And I think they bring some of those same strengths, at least from what I've observed from the games that I've watched. And correct me if I'm wrong, Ian. They seem like they're a fast team to me. They seem like they're incredibly tenacious. They seem like they have a brutal forecheck, which Vegas does too. So it'll be really interesting to see two teams that have, an incredibly high pressure forecheck going on. And I'll tell you the one thing that makes me nervous about Florida. During this playoffs, they have a relentless work ethic.
Yep.
I mean, and listen, if you get outworked, you're going to lose a lot of nights. And so Vegas needs to do what they did in Game 6 against Dallas. Because in Game 6, their work ethic was 110%. I mean, they were on point for the entire 60. And I fully expect Florida to do that. Their work ethic is going to be second to none. I fully expect. Now, you would hope that Vegas would be up for it, right? But that seems to be one of Vegas's flaws. Like they sometimes they get out there and they don't quite have that same work ethic every once in a while. Now, maybe it's not that they don't have the work ethic. Maybe it's that the other team, gets an advantage, and then, the other team's playing so well that they can make you look bad. Who knows? But But that's what worries me particularly about Florida. They are tenacious, relentless, just keep coming at you, and Vegas is built that way too. But but scrappy. That's how I would put it. Florida is like a super, super scrappy team. And I think both teams are going to have to look for those greasy goals. I think there's going to be a lot of those sort of greasy, up close, hack and whack, rebounds in the blue paint. Like I expect a lot of that kind of scoring, or maybe not a lot, but a lot of the scoring I expect to be those kind of goals in this series, especially because both, like you said, both goalies right now are just brick walls, aren't they?
They are. And you're right. Look, I think it was somewhere I was reading where it said that Paul Maurice's teams are driven by 3 E's. It's effort, energy, and effort. And I think that's the way that they play. And they had to. I remember that first game against Carolina had 3 overtimes. So they played 6 periods. And I remember watching the game, because by the time I got up in the UK, the game was still going, and you could see Carolina fans in the crowd. It was 1 a.m. their time, and they were kind of sleeping in their sort of trying to in their seats, and the game was still going. And okay, yes, the players were obviously tired, but Florida was still playing that same game. Now, if you look at the statistics, Florida's only real standout statistic is their power play. It's at 27.9%, which is considerably higher than Vegas's, which is 18.5%. So I do think in terms of comparisons to previous series, it's a little bit like Edmonton, where Vegas are going to have to be very careful about how many penalties they give away. There's always the chance that you allow the emotion of the spectacle to get the better of you. But in terms of the rest, the penalty kill is give or take the same as Vegas. Is slightly higher at 71%, whereas Vegas is just over 63%. But face-off, Vegas have got a better face-off percentage. They've got a better shots on goal. So I think overall, Vegas looks statistically like the better team. But Florida are in the Stanley Cup Final for a reason, and I do think it comes down to this kind of never say die spirit that Paul Maurice has got. And I remember him. He was famously quoted, wasn't he, before the Boston series finished, saying we're gonna wear this team down and we're gonna beat them, and that's exactly what they did over the 7 games, and and that's why if this series is done in 4 or 5 games, I'll be really, really, really shocked, because to me has 6 or 7 written on it, because I just don't see either team giving up. I think Vegas aren't going to give up. There's a lot of people on that Vegas roster who will have dreamt about being in a Stanley Cup Final. There's not that many that are from the original year, so there's not that many people in the Vegas team that actually went to the Stanley Cup Final in year 1. People like Eichel, people like that. This is this is their chance, his chance. Adin Hill as well, we mentioned earlier. So it's super exciting, and we'll see.
Absolutely, opportunities like this are very rare, and I think you're right. I think if Vegas stays disciplined, and I think if they stick to their structure and the work ethic is there, then Vegas probably has a slight edge in the series. But you know how that goes. Puck luck is a thing, and momentum shifts, and this will not be a boring series. I expect it to be action-packed, fast-paced. Very, I expect it to be pretty physical, especially at the beginning, right? I feel like, especially in game 1 and 2, I think both teams will be trying to establish dominance. Vegas doesn't need to get pulled into the scrums and all that stuff. That's probably what Florida wants, in the same way that Edmonton wanted that. And so I think it'll be to Vegas' advantage to avoid that at all costs, if that's the kind of game Florida wants to play, because we've seen how that pans out. But I'm pumped about it. It's pretty amazing that the Knights are here again, and I think if they ever had a shot at it, they've got their best shot this year. Like there's a considerable chance here that Vegas will ultimately lift the cup in this series. They've got just as good a shot, if not a slightly better shot, than Florida to get it done. Now, fun little side bit here, Ian, that I told you a little bit about before we wrap up, but just thought I'd share it with our listeners. Now, so I'm going to be at the Stanley Cup Final, game 1. Actually, I'm going to be at game 1 and game 2. Game 2, I'm going as a spectator. I have tickets for game 2. Game 1, for those of you that don't know, I work in video production and media. I work as a producer, and I work on crews. And So randomly, I'm not going to be at the game representing Gold and Steel, but I am going to be at the game, and I'm going to be working backstage, and I'm actually going to be on the video crew with Emily Kaplan of ESPN, who is, for those of you who don't know, she's like the main ringside reporter, and I'm going to be on her video crew. So actually going to spend the whole game with her and doing the player interviews. And so I only bring that up because it's kind of fun, and also because I want you guys, our listeners, to tune into the next episode, because I'll probably have all kinds of fun little stories from behind the scenes of what it was like to work with Emily Kaplan. And of course, we're going to be interviewing players, and I'm going to be right in the middle of it, and I couldn't be more thrilled. The only thing that sucks, Ian, is that I'm going to be working, and so I'm not going to be able to sit back and watch the game. I'm going to be having to focus on my job, but what an opportunity, right? To be right there in the middle of all of it. It's like I said, it's what I do, but I've never worked a Stanley Cup final. I've never worked in this particular environment before. So I'm pretty pumped about that. But yeah, for our listeners, tune in next episode, because I'll definitely have some fun stories to share. Mm-hmm. And hopefully it's also that Vegas has a win that night. So
yeah, fingers crossed. Actually, one thing we didn't mention in terms of, and you're going to be front and center, man. I mean, I know it's said you're working, and it's so awesome to be able to be that close. Mm-hmm. In terms of the players, the interviews, the action as well, because obviously they interviewed them right on the edge of the rink. But the atmosphere for Game 1 is no doubt going to be absolutely electric, and it can't be understated how important the atmosphere that the Vegas fan base is going to could have on those initial games. How loud the building is, how much the team is supported, like that can make the difference. Being arguably the sixth man, person. It's exciting, man.
It was worth it to earn that home ice advantage, right? Like Vegas, it's weird because Vegas is a really good road team as well, and Florida just seems to be good no matter where they play. But you're right, there are times when that home ice advantage matters for sure. Especially, I feel like if it's a situation where Vegas goes up by a couple goals early or something like that, that's when the home ice advantage can really help. The crowd is rocking, right, and the opponent, you'd have to not be human to not be a little rattled by that, especially on such a big stage. Stanley Cup final, right? I mean, these guys are pros, but they're human. So you're right. That's my hope, is that Vegas gets off to a fast start, goes up by 1 or 2 goals early on, and, can start off by winning at least Game 1. Good chance there'll be a split between Game 1 and Game 2. But if Vegas goes back to Florida up 2-0, they definitely are in a very advantageous position. So it'll be important for them to strike first and strike fast. But, well, we shall soon find out. Ian, it's a pleasure as always, buddy. And what a great time of year. And we lucked out. We've only been doing this podcast, a year and a half, couple years. And here we are in the final. We've been talking about this forever, and we're actually going to get to watch it. Going to get to see what happens here, man. I'm pumped. And hopefully we'll see how things pan out. But folks, we're probably going to bring you, I think, one more episode, very likely, before the series is over, unless it's a sweep or something. Unless something crazy happens and it's a sweep, then our next episode will be a Stanley Cup wrap-up and kind of a season wrap-up before we sort of take a break. But assuming the series goes long, we'll probably bring you one more episode before the cup is lifted by one team or the other, and then after that, we'll do our kind of end of the season wrap-up. But lots of exciting stuff coming up. And what do you think, Ian? You want to do one more here before, before the end of the series?
Before we press go. So I'm going to be in Mallorca from this coming Tuesday for a week.
Little vacay.
Which luckily my phone means that I'll be able to still watch the games, which will be cool. Time difference is not much different, so it'll still be horrendous, but I can use the Viaplay app to do that, so I can still watch the games. And yeah, like you said, man, I think we'll try and record something either after Game 4 or before Game 5.
Around Game 4 or Game 5, somewhere in that neighborhood. And then we'll have a good feel for where the series is
What
headed.
I might do that time is make sure we have the video on, mate, just to get the listeners jealous when I've got pina coladas and everything in the background.
yeah, you should. Today we're for those who are not watching on YouTube. Today we're only recording video for me because of where Ian is at the moment. Anybody who's watching on YouTube will obviously be able to see that you can't see Ian's face today. But yeah, we'll get you on video next time. And once again, our listeners have been so engaged and involved, and we've been having great conversations and lots of growth lately, and we really appreciate that from all of you. So, and feel free to get in touch with us, everybody. You can visit our website, goldandsteel.vegas. goldandsteel.vegas. And there's a mailbag feature there. You can get in touch with us if there's anything you'd like us to discuss on the show or any questions, or you just want to say hi. And of course, also on the Gold and Steel Twitter profile, which is at Gold and Steel VGK on Twitter. You can talk to us. We're on there every day. So we'd love to hear from you. But thanks again, everybody, for joining us, and exciting times to come here. Fingers crossed that Vegas can finally lift the cup. I say finally, they've only been in the league for 6 years, but we've been hoping for it all this time. So, and this could be the year. So thanks again, everybody. Stay safe. Take it easy. Enjoy this rare opportunity to watch our team in the final, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.